A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
We're talking about Christians and our education system. What does it look like when we make an evaluation according to our Christian faith? Can you compare the state system of education with Christian-based schools? And isn't much of the curriculum often very similar? Well, the amazing thing is that here in Australia there's a huge number of Christian schools. In fact, around 3,000 combined Catholic and Christian schools. Christian schools are in fact the fastest growing sector in Australia. Almost 40% of schools across Australia are either affiliated with Christian values or are Catholic or Christian independent schools. In fact, Australia has one of the highest proportions of Christian school enrolment in the developed world. So we're going to talk education over this next short while. Is there a Christian view of education? Well, Christian commentator David Robertson is back with us. David writes for newspapers, magazines, is the author of a number of books, including The Dawkins Letters and Engaging with Atheists. He's also the minister at Scots Kirk Presbyterian Church in Newcastle, New South Wales. Hey, David, a special welcome back to 2020.
It's great to be back, and can I welcome you back to your own show? We've missed you being away for away for a month.
I was away for 5 weeks, and very thankful for those who sat in, and thanks for your faithfulness in your content coming, even though I was not here. Hey, education, David. Schools, colleges, universities, state education, it's become a whole lot more hostile to Christian values. Why would we be talking about a Christian view of education? Where would you like to start?
Well, do you know what I'd like to start? I would like to start in Scotland, as you might expect. No, and I would like to start in the 16th century with a man called John Knox, who said once that where there is a church, there is a school. And he so tied in education with the church that basically everywhere they built a church, they built a school. And from that, the Scottish people became the most literate in the world. And from that, many of them came to Australia. I'll pretty well guarantee that wherever your listeners are listening, there are Scottish names and so on. Macquarie, for example, and all that was to tie it in with the education system. And I think the Australian education system is a product of that. But the thing where I really want to go is, as somebody who's been in this country for 6 years, to contrast it with my own country of Scotland. We used to be known as the land of the people of the book. Now, as our education has turned more and more away from its Christian roots, 1 in 5 Scots is functionally illiterate. But it astounded me when I came to Australia to discover just how many Christian schools there are. And that is because of a very sensible government policy which funds Christian schools as well. So I'm here in Newcastle, and in Newcastle in the Hunter Valley, there are more than 70 Christian schools. Now, that includes the Catholic schools, 58 Catholic schools, educating about 20,000. There are at least 10,000 pupils in the other schools, and some of these schools are amazing, like St. Philip's Christian College or Hunter Christian School or Belmont Christian College, which is my own particular favourite. I love going up there. I've spoken at a couple of events recently, one in the Central Coast, one in North Sydney, to several hundred teachers at each from Christian schools. And I'll tell you this, I hope Christians in Australia realise the fabulous resource that you have in Christian schools and never let it go. Here in our area, Hunter Valley, Newcastle, nearly 45% of pupils, of all pupils, attend Christian schools. That's a phenomenal resource. And okay, we can say that some of them are maybe not as Christian as others, but there are some very, very good Christian schools with large number of pupils, with excellent teachers. Lots of problems, of course, but what a resource. And it's something, first of all, I would want to give thanks for.
We'll give thanks to God and give him all glory and honour. Hey, Christian schools flourishing in Australia, and as you reflect those numbers, it might even be higher numbers in Newcastle and the Hunter than it is throughout the rest of Australia. But something like 40% of schools are from that Christian base. Just amazing. And the numbers of students, not quite as large as in the state system, but it's pretty solid. But you know, when we think of Christian schools flourishing, David, it might be no wonder that there might be activists who are trying to control it and control the narrative of Christian schools. And there needs to be some sort of pushback, doesn't there? Because if someone's trying to change your Christian narrative, you want to be able to maintain it, don't you?
Absolutely, and that's what's going to happen, because I quite happily call the woke progressive agenda has taken over the kind of high end of society in terms of, upper academia, in terms of the corporations, and in terms of much of the media. The one area that they really have not been able to get is into the Christian schooling system. And that wouldn't matter to them if it was tiny, but because it's so big, they really are concerned about it. And one of the things they want to do is to impose the world's standards and the world's ethics on a Christian school. And they're just going to keep pushing and pushing and pushing against this. And we've just got to say, no, you're not. You can't do this. Now, I do think that the sheer numbers involved is actually going to make it very difficult for them. But we need to watch out for that. And I think one of the most important things for Christian schools is for them to remain Christian. What often happened in history in the UK and also here in Australia is that you would get an organization, whether it was a charitable organization or an educational organization, begin solidly in Christianity and then drift. And it would have all the fruit of its Christian roots. And sometimes that fruit could exist for decades after it left its Christianity, but eventually that dies. And I would say that the university system in Europe was fundamentally Christian, and that's turned away from that. The education system in Scotland was fundamentally Christian. It's turned away from that. And I would say that we need to be very careful in Australia to maintain the Christian aspect of the Christian schools and not just see them as just a form of private school or alternative state education, but with the same values and ethos as the state. No, we need to have Christ's values. And that's what makes the schools so attractive to many people, including many, many people who are not Christians who would prefer to send their kids to a Christian school.
Hey, when we talk Christian ethos, that's all very well because someone's thinking, oh, there's a priest who turns up every now and then and blesses the students. Or there's, some special reference to, special holy days, there's Easter and Christmas, those sorts of things. But when we start talking about Christian having a view of education, aren't we talking about here who holds some level of objective truth? As Christians, we know where our truth is founded, and we might say that in a state system or a secularized system, somehow or other they've, lost the roots of that objective truth, and they're off in a sort of a relativistic way of, working out, who we indoctrinate next on our particular ideology. Truth is a big issue, isn't it, in education when we think about it as Christians?
Well, it's a key issue. So a couple of things here. It's not that people nowadays don't believe in objective truth. It's just they don't know where it comes from. And often, basically, it comes out of, I would say, the barrel of a gun. What I mean by that is it comes out of those who have power. So those who have power and money determine that their ethos and their ethics are the ones that we all have to accept. Whereas what I would argue is there's an objectivity within Christianity. And I'll give you a good example of that. It's not just, somebody turning up and blessing a holy day or whatever. It's not what I would call secularism with a religious veneer. at very heart, it is this. So another nation that has Christian schools that are funded by the state is, amazingly for some people, the Netherlands. And that's because of a man called Abraham Kuyper, who at the beginning of the 20th century instilled this. And he had a saying that all truth is God's truth, and also there isn't one square inch on earth where Christ does not say, that is mine. So I would argue all truth is Christ's truth. It's not that you don't teach maths by going, there's one God, two natures in the person of Christ, 3 parts of the Trinity, 4 Gospels, 5 loaves or whatever. That's not how you teach arithmetic or maths. What it means is that we believe that underlying the foundation of everything is the truth that comes from God. And also that education is about teaching pupils how to think, not what to think. And it's also helping them be the best that they can be in terms of their character, their being and who they are. And that does include the physical, the mental, the social, and the spiritual. And my view is that it's only a Christian school, or at least an education that is based upon Christian principles, that can fundamentally do that. And that's why it's so important. For me, it's almost hard to think of a subject that is more necessary for the church to defend and to proclaim than the fact that all truth is Christ's truth, and we educate people on that basis.
And we might argue over what's true even within our Christian bounds, but there is a common enemy of this truth, isn't it? Because we've got a federal government and we've got state jurisdictions that largely take control of the education agenda and policy. Governments that win power, coming back to who's governing by the gun, the might thing of we have a mandate for change. The people voted for us, and our ideology is going to be implemented. Christians and our view of education in all of that, you're saying it needs to be anchored and stand firm no matter what winds blow. Yeah.
So, let me give you an example of this. One of the reasons we're discussing this is that you kindly mentioned before that I do a podcast called Quantum of the Wee Flea. Well, I've been so impressed by Australian Christian radio that I'm giving that up in a sense, or at least morphing it, changing it into something called Beauty for Ashes that I'm going to run through Rima Radio, but also as a podcast. And on the first edition, which goes out tonight, I have an emphasis on education in one part of it. And I talk about a school in Dorset in England where a parent has been complaining that his child has been fed partisan political views and has been brainwashed by being forced to read a book which makes her feel guilty for being white, and which also includes explicit sexual themes. Now, all of this is just indoctrination. I have many listeners to the podcast, and somebody wrote me and sent me a screenshot of a Spanish text teaching where pupils are meant to be learning Spanish, and one of the phrases that they have to learn is something like Don Juan is transgender and is very happy with it. Now, when you're starting learning, you're meant to be learning Spanish. You can see what happens. It's becoming endless indoctrination. And I notice that with our young people. I feel that a lot of the work that I do with young people is actually try to get them to think for themselves and not along the lines that they're being indoctrinated in within the state system. So I think that's, again, why I say this is so important. I'm appalled at what I would call the cultural Marxism that has crept into our whole culture, but particularly the education system, so that our young people are being indoctrinated into something which is profoundly harmful.
When we're teaching students to be able to think the way you're saying, sometimes we call that critical thinking, don't we? It's the idea of teaching how to think rather than what to think. And when we talk about all of these sorts of resources that are being now forced on students, indoctrinating them around gender and relationships and sexuality, all those sorts of things, is there a sense in which, children need to be able to be taught how to think about those things, because they will be exposed to them? This, where our Christian grounding in truth comes back to not just the schools but our families as well. Somehow or other, our kids have to be able to taught to think critically about these things, don't they, David?
Yeah, so I would call it biblical critical thinking. So it's not just, because when we say the term critical thinking, people hear the word criticism, like you and I are talking, and maybe somebody wants to write in and go, I thought that was a terrible show. And, they're being critical in that way. But on the other hand, there may be somebody who says, well, been reflecting on what's being said, and it seems to me that from a biblical perspective, you overstress one thing or you didn't say another thing. Well, that's people thinking for themselves, and that's what I want to encourage people to do. And I think it's what we want to encourage children to do, which is why a lot of the style of teaching that I have for young people is question and answer. It's why the two books I wrote on it for teenagers were teenagers writing in questions. But I just didn't give them answers. I tried to get them to think for themselves biblically and go back and ask more questions, find out things, but investigate. We don't find out in a vacuum. We don't find out on the basis of we're the Yoda of the universe and we understand everything. We find out on the basis of all truth is God's truth. And so what that means actually is we're not afraid of anything, because we can always bring it back to the Word, and the Word brings us back to Christ, and Christ brings us to God.
Let me drop you into the deep end here. The homeschool movement, which you might even say outside of state and Christian schools, the homeschool movement is growing. A lot of people who are saying, well, I can't trust the education system, and they might even be putting a judgment there on Christian education as well as the secularized state education. Is homeschooling a relevant alternative, or is that something that where you've got parents who are aware of some of the issues ought to be in there arguing and fighting for good, objective truth to be taught in whatever school setting their children might be a part of? Any thoughts here?
Well, okay, what I'm going to say is probably going to be heretical to virtually everybody at some point. Look, here's the thing. I think parents are the people who are fundamentally responsible for the education of their children. That's my starting base. Now, it depends who you are. You could be in an area where there is a very good state school, good head teacher or whatever, and you're quite happy to send your kids there, because what you're doing is you're sitting around with your kids afterwards talking about things and so on. You could be in an area where there's a very good Christian school and you're able to send your child. But you may be in a situation where you don't want to do that. There may be personal circumstances and all the rest of it. And I think homeschooling is a very valid option. I think if you have the ability to do it, providing, and this is the proviso I'd put on it, and most homeschoolers do this, providing you connect with other people who are also doing homeschooling, and providing it's not done in what I would call a manipulative and controlling way, so that when your child actually leaves the home, they are not prepared for the world that lies ahead. But look, there are many people who have been well educated at home. I would support parents in terms of whatever they decide for their own child. I wouldn't condemn somebody for sending their child to a state school or to a Christian school or for homeschooling. As long as they've thought about it, prayed about it, and realize the importance of education for their child. And often you'll find, of course, that homeschoolers do.
Okay, we need to wrap up our conversation. Just come back here for a few moments. As the outsider, as you say, you've been here for 6 years, and you've noticed that in Australia, Christian schooling is so strong. Something like around about 40% of schools are Christian, independent, they're Catholic, they're, Christian aligned. Fabulous strength in all of that. We don't want to let go of that strength. We've got to be able to even put our weight behind that wherever we can, because there are various bodies that are spokespeople on behalf of different sectors in the Christian schooling movement. Oftentimes they have to stand up and be counted when it comes to the things that are coming against them, those who are wanting to bring change. There is a certain sense here in which, as parents, we've got some responsibility here to take a deeper, more active role in our education system. Any encouragement here for parents as we wrap things up?
Sure. Stay involved in your schools. Pray for teachers. I would encourage young people to get into teaching if they can. I would also say just that churches need to think about this. Churches should adopt local schools. Churches should make education an absolute priority. I would plead with parents not to just hand their education over and say, hey, the school will look after my kids. Because very often when that happens, what really is happening is the school just becomes a giant babysitting thing. I think all education should be a partnership between parents, the church, and the school, and of course the pupils. We don't forget the pupils. They're obviously essential to that. By the way, just one other small thing to say. One other difference between Australia and Scotland is this. It's not just the education system. It's that Christian media is so prevalent and encouraging. And I think, again, perhaps even what we're doing here, Christian media should also be involved in education.
Fabulous stuff, and that just gives you an idea, if you just get a bit aspirational in your thinking about how Christian media can extend even vision here in the future. What does it look like? I know that our leaders are often talking about all the different dimensions that Christian media can cover. Wonderful insights as always. Christian commentator David Robertson, he mentioned the We Flee podcast is on its way out, being replaced by something with a new title. Beauty for Ashes. Keep an eye out for that new podcast. And David mentioned it's going to be launching on the Rima Christian station in Newcastle. Who knows where it might appear, somewhere on the Vision app, or we'll just have to work on that and leave that in the hands of our guys who make those decisions. But look out for that new podcast. Wherever you listen to podcasts, Beauty for Ashes. No doubt you'll still be able to go to the weflee.com website. And there might even be some new web things happening and some expansion that's going on around the good work that David Robertson is involved in. He's also the minister at Scots Kirk Presbyterian Church in Newcastle in New South Wales. His latest book is called Seek, but some little bird tells me that you're getting close to your next book, David. Any insights here?
Ask, seek. Guess what the third one's going to be? Knock.
Knock. Okay, so, right.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
David.
Actually, I just got a letter from my publisher saying, "Where's the manuscript?" So I better get back to it.
Okay. Well, you work hard on it. Thanks so much for your insights once again, David Robertson.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.